Hello, Jason.
G'day, Henry.
How are you doing today?
I'm good, mate. That's good. It's nice to be in the office for the first time in a while.
Yeah, and of course it's a corona-friendly situation, so we're both in the office, but we're in separate rooms, just to be safe, of course. But I appreciate you sitting down with me today for our second episode of Behind the Future, powered by Ardoq. So of course, everyone that is watching and will be watching, my name is Henry Colt. I work as an account executive at Ardoq, and today I'm fortunate enough to sit down with my colleague and good friend Jason, Chief Enterprise Architect at Ardoq. And we're going to talk a little bit about different things today. We're going to talk about some of the research that we've been doing over the last year with over 100 of our customers in regards to some of the trends that they're leveraging going forward, as well as some of the challenges and mistakes that is frequently done within enterprise architecture and how organizations can, get more value out of their enterprise architecture initiatives going forward. So kind of the first thing is to get to know a little bit about yourself, Jason. So you have been working as a chief enterprise architect at Ardoq for some time now. So it would be great to start off with just to hear a little bit about your background and why you are such kind of in love with enterprise architecture.
Love. Okay, sure. Yeah, so I've been here a few months now in Ardoq, but I've been following Ardoq from the start. So I know the founders, and I've seen Ardoq when it was just a toy idea running on one of their laptops to how it's grown now. And in that time myself, I've worked as a consultant, a contractor in solution and enterprise architecture. I worked as a chief architect in a national IT intensive company. I've worked responsible for architecture design in multinational company.
Mhm.
And even back in the beginning, I started in academic and industrial research around architecture design, IT architecture design. So it's really nice to come back into the tool world now and take, 20 odd years worth of
Yeah.
experience and pump that back into a product. It'll be
Mhm.
interesting.
Yeah, definitely, and also from kind of your experience as well, and both from an academic perspective, of course, but then also from a practical perspective. How can you kind of shed a light on how you see in enterprise architecture have changed over these last couple of years, or as we're going to talk about as well, like organizations are forced to be doing change much more often now, and every business today is an IT business, and the other way around. So, how do you see some of the changes and kind of developments that has been within enterprise architecture for the last years?
Sure. So, I mean, as you just said, these companies, all companies are software companies now, and it's hardly late breaking news. I'm not telling you anything new. I think Mark Andreessen wrote his article, if you know that one, on software is eating the world. Geez, I think it's 10 years ago now, talking about how all companies are IT companies, in essence now, and all companies have been doing digital transformation or applying digital techniques to what they do for well over 10 years. But what we're finding is that although these digitalization has been really good for helping companies with how they interact with their customers, improving the customer journey, and making themselves more efficient in how they operate, and giving themselves new abilities, new capabilities to do things that they couldn't do before, there's a flip side. And the flip side is that almost all business change is IT change. So you don't think of IT as being a support function for the business. IT is the IT is the substrate on which the business operates. It's the place where business runs to a much larger extent now. Which means if you want to make some kind of change, not everything, but the vast majority of change is IT change, and that's harder than it used to be. So there's lots of advantages with digitalization. But
Yep.
the trade-off, and there's always a trade-off, is that you have to work harder on change. And change is increasing.
Yep.
Disruption, competitors, acquisitions, mergers, all that stuff. It's just constant change. And enterprise architects are much more now in the sort of in the consulting business. When the business wants to introduce a new change idea, how do they do it? That's what enterprise architects are doing, in addition to what they've always done.
Mhm. And just for the organizations and IT professionals that is also kind of newer to the concept of enterprise architecture, kind of where is that placed within the organization? So, what is kind of if you look at 2020 and beyond, and 2021 now, of course, what are some of the key kind of value drivers that an enterprise architecture function should be delivering on, just as a starting point?
Oh, well, it's about delivering certainty. So when you're doing change, you want to know in what kind of direction you need to go, both from a technical and a business direction. So architects have always spoken about their targets. We don't think about targets as a destination. Targets is about a direction. And people want to know what kind of direction they need to move in rather than what the end goal is, because the end goal is always changing. But you want to be moving in a direction where everything fits together, so it makes sense and it works together. And you need to be able to provide that common direction for everybody.
Yep. And of course, today's topic as well, we're going to dive into a little bit of the research that Ardoq has been conducting over the last year. So can you quickly kind of shed a light on how we have been conducting this research with our customers, and kind of what are some of the key outputs that we were hoping to accomplish with this survey and this research as well?
Sure. I'll touch a bit on it now, and then we'll come back to it later. But when we're looking at trends in EA, it's nice if we're able to provide guidance for customers and other people that are interested. But we know that people out there, they're dealing with a bombardment of material coming from companies like Ardoq and other vendors and consulting companies and analysts. And some of it's really good, some of it a bit dubious in quality, right? But there's just a constant flow. So yeah, we'd like to give our understanding of best practices. But what we would also like to do, because we're a software as a service company, and because we have lots of different customers in many different domains, many different verticals, many different levels of IT intensity in what they do, it's a really good base to do some empirical research. So there's lots of good empirical research in software architecture and enterprise architecture nowadays. Not everything has to be opinion-based. So we think it's great if Ardoq can start spending some time extracting information or working together with our customers to get their experiences out on specific research questions, and then feed it back. Right? Architects want to learn from each other about what they do. And it's one thing to listen to a webinar about one company and what one company did. But if we're able to extract meaning from hundreds of customers and what they do, that provides another level of quality, another level of help that we're able to provide. So that's a goal of what we're doing. We'll come back to the specific survey at the end there.
Yep. And then of course, what we see, just to kind of touch upon your point as well, regarding there's a lot of vendors in this industry that is growing as well. You have consultancies, and of course, we as a vendor company as well, we know that the tool can only take you so far. So we also need to have an understanding of what are some of the changes in the organization and how you can transition that from a better perspective. And we know that by able to develop those best practices as well, I think that is going to help our customers as well to better understand how they can use platforms like Ardoq or any other platforms that they were to use as well. But for the last couple of years, especially at Ardoq, we've been talking about this concept of kind of a digital twin of the organization as well. So there's a lot of different definitions of what a digital twin of an organization is. Can you kind of explain a little bit what do we mean by a digital twin at Ardoq?
Sure. So digital twin is a concept from industry, where from, let's say, around the early 2000s, where people in business management talked about building up a virtual representation of your system, whatever that is, normally a physical system, so that you can analyze and manipulate the virtual system. And that system has connections to the real system. So the virtual twin, digital twin, has connections to the real system, so that you can manipulate and push that out into the environment and get feedback back into your virtual twin. So you can analyze and manipulate without disturbing the actual system itself. Give you an example, right? A friend of mine actually has a startup here in Norway doing a digital twin of molecular design systems, where they're able to simulate how that works digitally, so that these chemical and biological engineers can design molecules, and that pushes that out into the system which actually does the work. Now, for digital twin of the organization, I think it was Gartner 4 or 5 years ago, used that concept as a metaphor for what we do in enterprise architecture, building up the digital twin. And the way we interpret that, it's about taking the traditional enterprise architecture models, like your business capabilities and processes and applications, etc., but augmenting those models with real-time operational data about how your business executes. When we talk about real-time operational data, we're not talking about the traditional thing in analytics about, how many customer orders do I have today, or how many customers have churned. We're talking about how you execute. So measuring in real time things like, what are my teams working on? How much effort are they putting into certain initiatives or projects? What is the lead time for when we have ideas to them actually turning in to things that get executed? Or what is the lead time on an idea to actually time to value when it's out there in the market? And matching that up to the traditional things about how is our application landscape organized? How is our business processes organized? And if you can overlay that real-time operational data on your more traditional structural data of your enterprise architecture, then it starts to give you insight about how you can improve what you do. So as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, the big change for everybody in the last 10 years is how to deal with change, how to provide certainty. And when you're working as an EA, in addition to creating your roadmaps and your targets and digital technology radars, etc., where you spend a lot of your time, or where I used to spend a lot of my time, was just sitting down with business management and IT management and saying, okay, we've got this idea. Where is the impact of this idea going to hit in our organization? Where is it going to hit in the processes? Where is it going to hit in the applications? What's the ripple effect going to be? If we have to make a change here, where is it going to pop up somewhere else? Which teams need to be involved? What are they currently working on? When could they start working on this project? When can I start to extract the benefit of this idea that we have, that we desperately want to get to market? And then, when you say, well, I could go and do a 3-month pre-project for you,
Exactly.
right? People just say, IT, it's a bottleneck, they never deliver. You want to be able to answer that question as fast as possible. That's why you want to be overlaying this information now. So you can provide certainty to these people that have all these ideas, that want to take all this value out to market. You can give them certainty about when you can get them out into the market and get value, when you can actually deliver. If you say, I don't know, I'll go and figure it out, it doesn't help them. But if you say, look, I can give you the answer next week, then they have certainty in what they're doing. Even if the answer is, we can't really, because of all these things that are involved, we can't really get to that problem for another 3 months. They won't be happy, but at least they have some kind of certainty about what they can do instead. And even better, if you can say, look, the way you're pitching the idea now, we can't get to it in 3 months. But if you change your idea just slightly this way, that means we can get the first release to market without including the mobile app, and we just do it with the web app to test the idea. We can get you out the door in a month instead of 3 months. And they'd be able to say, okay, well, let's adjust. Let's be much more agile in how we approach the problem. So that's what you're after. The goal isn't to create all these models and combine all this data. The goal is to help the people with all these ideas get their ideas out the door and get them to value, right? And your job as the architect is to understand how everything works together so that you can give them certainty about how they deliver their business ideas.
And then on that point, like, what is the difference between how, you know, enterprise architecture is being practiced today versus how it was done in the past? Just having that digital twin in the back of your heads as well when you're kind of executing on enterprise architecture.
So traditionally, we had these data, these models, right, of how the applications worked, your architecture, how the processes worked. They're a bit static. So they captured the way things are now at this point in time, and they capture an idea of where you want to get to in the future. But they were a bit separate from what are the teams that we have and how they work. How good are we at combining teams very flexibly, you know, cross-functional teams to execute in a fast way. So often when an idea came down the pipeline in strategy, your strategy to execution process, someone would say, how can we go about doing this? And the architect would say, well, this is the way I think it should work, in, you know, once we get it implemented. But you would have this pre-project to try and figure it out. And then you would have to involve all the different managers for all the different teams. And it would take you a long time to go and work out how to solve it and who would solve it and when they would be able to solve it and how that compares with other ideas that you have going on. Because the problem is never, I wonder what we should spend our money on. There's always 1,001 ideas that people have.
Yep.
The problem is prioritization. Mm-hmm. What is the best way that we should use our people and our systems and solutions that we have in order to get the best idea out there that helps us and helps our customers? How do we prioritize given the constraints we have on our people and the money we have to invest? And that's a little bit different to what it used to be before. We want to be able to answer quickly these questions. Time to decision making is sort of the new metric for how EA should operate.
Mm-hmm. And then also, of course, you mentioned kind of leading change with certainty, right? So a lot of the time it seems like, from our understanding as well, after working with enterprise architecture functions as well, like a lot of the time, a lot of decisions as well is also led through uncertainty. There's a lot of things when decisions are being made that they don't really have a proper understanding of where do we have our weaks, or kind of weaknesses and gaps and mistakes, and what's the impact when we're actually executing on certain projects. And then, of course, as everyone can see at the bottom line here now, we have socio-technical architecture, and how does that fit into the picture of some of the trends that we've been seeing as well with our research?
Sure, it's a little bit in the same direction. So when we spoke about digital twin of the org, we talked about incorporating information about how you operate as a business on top of your traditional, not completely static, but much more static, slowly changing architecture models. So what's different about socio-technical architecture is that it goes in the same direction, but it considers how you execute as an organization. So not just including the metrics of how you execute, but understanding the people that do the work. So this concept of socio-technical architecture comes from systems thinking, the concept of socio-technical systems. Your business that executes, that is constantly executing to deliver change, it is a type of system which is made up of people and processes and technology and teams and how they interact. And the area of strategic domain-driven design is sort of an area within sort of the IT environment. Well, not just IT. It's one of the microcosms that exists. And they've been pushing this concept of socio-technical architecture, lifting up socio-technical systems. Because that area, understanding how people build models and share models, how people build up systems and share the knowledge needed to deliver systems, they understand that the people and how they operate, people are not just resources. I don't know how many meetings I've been in, you know, when you're planning and you say, well, what sort of resources do we have to do this job? And even though you should refer to people as people and not resources, even if you say people, there's still there's still sort of a habit to treat people like cogs in a machine.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So you think of people as just executing robots. How much time do they need to do their job? But people are actors. People have their own needs and desires and their own psychology about how they work. And we know from decades now of working with agile teams and understanding how they work, that how people interact and do work together has a huge impact on the ability to do things well. So in socio-technical architecture, you start, in addition to the DTO concepts of adding metrics of how you operate, you think about how do we execute as a team and overlay that on your architecture. How many handoffs do we have between teams? How many teams do need to be working together in order to execute on this initiative? What sort of knowledge do they need to share with each other? What sort of other things are these people working on in addition to delivering on this idea, which is stealing their time? Because, you know, people aren't great at multitasking. People aren't, you know, once they're in a flow and once they're working co-located as a team, they get enormous amounts of work done.
Yep.
But if you split people apart and you give them multiple things to work on at the same time in completely different contexts, then they slow down. So there's a huge amount of slowdown. So socio-technical architecture is about taking these people concepts and applying them with the architecture. Okay, so this idea, you can trace it back to ideas like really famous books like Peopleware from, I don't even know when that came out, 2000, 1990-ish, Peopleware by DeMarco and Lister, which spoke about these human factors in delivering solutions. But much more recently, there's really popular books and you know, areas that people talk about, like Accelerate, the book, and team topologies, how we should organize teams in different ways.
Yep.
One of the exciting things that come out of team topologies is this concept of cognitive load. So when you have a team that's doing work, trying to deliver value on a solution, if they're spending 30% of their time on plumbing, how should we build up the infrastructure for our development environment in order to actually build this solution? That 30% of their time, they could be spending, not only spending that on building the solution instead, but the time it takes to switch task, you add that to what you're doing as well. So what we're looking at in socio-technical architecture and how it applies to EA is really about understanding how teams and people work together, understanding these handovers in terms of work, and understanding where knowledge needs to be passed between people and teams, and understanding where they are spending work doing things that is stealing their time, not just in absolute time, but in terms of the context switching time that needs to happen.
Yep.
Anyway, so there's a lot there.
Yeah, but just talking about the context switching as well as multitasking, that is a challenge that I'm pretty sure you don't just see within enterprise architecture, but that is just in work life in general, the challenges of multitasking. But kind of linking that to enterprise architecture as a concept as well, but then also your experience as a chief enterprise architecture, been working with enterprise architecture for many years, and then also linking that to a research, kind of, and also, you know, at the end of the day, it's still about IT, right? I also see we have a question there as well. We'll make sure that we address that at the end of the conversation. So stay put. But what are some of the common mistakes that you're seeing? You know, linking that to enterprise architecture. What are some of the kind of the key mistakes that you're seeing from your experience, but then also through the research that we've been conducting?
All right. So I mentioned earlier that we've started doing this research. From my own experience, the biggest mistake I've seen working, you know, when I was working as a consultant, you know, I'd be in maybe 20 different companies. So I've seen, I've seen a lot of different places. The biggest mistake is that people don't have a goal that they're trying to achieve with enterprise architecture. They document and they model, and as the comment mentions, of course, it's not just about IT. Totally agree. But they don't have a goal. So we model the capabilities of an organization, or we model the processes, or we document how the applications or the integrations work. But what are you going to do with it? What problem are you solving? And if you're not solving a real problem, then you're not going to have an impetus to keep that information up to date, and it very quickly goes out of date, and it very quickly becomes useless. So that's the biggest mistake I've seen, not having a continuous business goal that you're trying to achieve. But this work that we've done, so the initial survey that we've done with our customers has asked them, what are your biggest learnings? So you don't just have to listen to me and my pontifications, but what have we learned from our customers? And we've summarized that into the top 5 mistakes. So what would people like to do differently if they were starting again based on the mistakes they've learned? So there's a few articles being produced by Ardoq now. I think the first one's out today. And that's that's a great place to start reading about this.
Yep. And also just to kind of touch on Francis Gahn's comment as well from the video here now, like EA is not just about IT, and I completely agree with him as well. Like I also see this time after time that you have to link it to a business objective, you have to link it to a question that you want to solve, and very often when we engage with a lot of companies as well, especially starting out with an enterprise architecture kind of function, it's very much around the level of how do you actually combine business and IT together. Of course, in many cases, you typically start with the IT function because that is more of the operational data that you already have, but then also quickly linking that to the business, right, with the objectives and the strategy, the business processes, and that's also linking that to socio-technical architecture as well. It's something that we see more and more organizations need to handle. So before we wrap up, I want to make sure that we address the question as well that popped in.
Sure.
So would you like to go ahead and try to answer that question, Jason? Because it's about my pay grade, if I'm going to be honest.
Sure. So the easy way to answer this question is we don't know. That's what we want to figure out. So what we're seeing is that socio-technical architecture, these human factors, are very important if we're going to be better at our ability to execute and to deal with change. And what we want to do with what we're exploring now in Ardoq is how can we keep track of this information so that we can change how we organize our enterprise. So, of course, it's not just about IT. We know that architecture is much more holistic now. And so we have to take how is the enterprise designed? How is the IT department designed? How are the business capabilities put together and the organization that delivers those capabilities? All that stuff is important, and they have to line up, because if they don't line up, then you have more handoffs. You have to combine more teams in order to get work done. And we want to limit that so that we can change faster. So our approach, if we can start tracking this information and overlaying it on top of our structural enterprise architecture data, then we'll be able to have data which will help teams change their organization and make them better about executing. So if we give an example of that, right?
Yep.
Actually, I'll use a comment from our product strategist, Ed, who said it much more eloquently than me. So traditionally, architects want to model how our enterprise architecture is and how you work so that we can then design how it is that you should work. And one of the things we're finding with socio-technical architecture and digital twins is it's democratizing the process. If we can provide techniques to overlay this information on top of the structural information, the STA information and the DTO, what we're doing is we're modeling the enterprise architecture from the business down to the IT and the teams so that you can change how the business operates. You and your team can do the work, and not just one group of enterprise architects. That's what we want to have. We want the ability of people to dynamically change their organization.
I see that we have several comments in the comment section right now. I just want to address that as well, like with engagement, right? Being able to influence the stakeholders in the organization as well. That is another key factor that we've seen, especially with EA functions that are succeeding, is also from the ability to properly engage the different stakeholders around the organization as well, being able to communicate the value of not just where are you today, what are the mistakes that we're doing, what are the challenges that we're having, but then also what are the impact and where are we actually going, right? So we will make sure that we address all these kind of comments and questions after the LinkedIn Live event as well. We'll make sure to address kind of those questions and come with our perspectives on it. It might not be the final answer, but hopefully we'll shed some light on how we're looking at enterprise architecture. But there was one question here from Joshua Jakunic, Jason, that I want to make sure that we address. So he's asked us, can you provide an example of your biggest mistake of not having a goal of EA and how to go about starting to solve the problem? Do you mean start with a specific example of a project or more holistically have a goal for EA?
So thinking about business goals. So not for one particular project. Let's take one thing EAs always do is they try and model how the business operates in IT for those parts of the business that do. But often they just sit on that documentation. Not many people use it. And what they need to do is have to say, who am I serving with this information? And normally it's the CIO, of course, and IT management. It's also the IT organization. It's also the business managers and the business analysts who quite often want to understand, I have an idea that's formulating here, and I have sort of an idea about how it might work, but I don't really understand. So you want to be able to say, here is a place where you can find how your part of the business operates within IT without having to ask our team all the time, and make your work part of their process. So the real goal is making it part of their process, because then it becomes valuable. Right? And this is probably the most banal thing that enterprise architects do, which is just documenting parts. There's lots of other really interesting things that we do, but even just the documenting part, if it's not part of someone else's process of how they understand their issues, their goals, and what they're trying to achieve, then you will end up not having the capacity to keep it up to date. But once it becomes part of someone else's process, how they work, and it becomes valuable to them, then there's an impetus for you to keep that up to date. There's a reason for you to keep the funding for the people that you need to keep it up to date, or to build the automations, which is probably the best thing, building the automations you need to keep it up to date so that you don't have to do it manually. So when we talk about goals, it's about holistically the business goals and having a business stakeholder who owns that goal. It's not you it's not you as an EA that should own how business runs in IT. It's really the COO that should own that goal. And you are delivering that information to them and keeping it up to date.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I think we have another comment as well. I think it's not more of a question, but more of an observation. Kind of EA, or in my opinion, EA is usually not about IT, but IT is a tool to improve EA. What do you think about that reflection?
Oh man, Christopher, we should go out and have a beer and we can talk for hours and hours and hours about
Bring
this
me
topic.
Along.
But
I want a couple of beers.
I mean, of course, there's so many different aspects, and there's so many different types of organizations and what they do. So there's some organizations which are traditional, say, production organizations that have some IT and it's mostly pre-packaged and it's integrated together. And there's other sorts of organizations which are extremely IT intensive in what they do. And there's organizations like Ardoq, which are complete digital natives. They do nothing else but IT. And so it's really hard to come up with a pithy one-sentence explanation about how EA works for all of them. But you have what the business is trying to do. There is more and more IT that is where this business works. Of course, it's more than just the IT, but you need to holistically put all those pieces together. So one thing we're doing, Ardoq, is we're participating with a group called the Intersection Group, which is looking at enterprise design and customer experience and IT-focused enterprise architecture and a few other parts to make sure that the holistic approach to EA is taken care of. So we're certainly not a EA is just an IT problem sort of company. We are very much about the holistic part, but all customers have slightly different ratio in their business to IT in their world.
Yep. We have another reflection here from, or question, just because we have a lot of engagement now, which is good. I also see that we have Andy Yates, our previous guest on Behind the Future as well. Nice to see you again, Andy. Mohammed Malik, he writes a question like, what is one key point in your view that you think one should be mindful of when going about adopting EA in a situation where refactoring of an in-use system is required?
Oh man,
putting you on the spot there. Apologies.
I understand it's difficult. Often I've been in a number of companies that started 20, 25 years ago. There's a huge box somewhere in the corner called My Enterprise as a business in a box, whether it's a core banking system or a core telco system or a core insurance system or something else. And they have this landscape of microservices and digital channel solutions around that big box. And it's hard to get away from it. So you're always refactoring. And one of the hard parts is with these systems is understanding the impact of the change. And also because it's so old that often you have a bottleneck on the people that do the change because they end up being involved in everything. So there's many techniques for being able to isolate these kinds of changes and getting away from the system. In an ideal world, you would be able to, make a major change and get some of these old legacy systems out the door. But it's a huge investment. So you will always have to have tactical solutions which refactor the old solution in addition to moving things out. What I would say is be very clear about your domain boundaries when you do the refactoring. Often I've seen when you have these legacy systems, legacy solutions, is that the things you build on the outside become compensations for what you have on the inside, and your domains become overlapping. And it works for 6 months, but as the rate of change increases, it's really hard to keep the distinction between domains and between solutions that implement aspects of those domains. So you need to work extremely hard to keep a clear separation, just separation of concerns.
Yep. Great. I think there's a lot of more questions to unfold after this session today, so we'll make sure that we address that afterwards. And apologies, Jason, for putting you on the spot with all these questions.
Our job is, mate.
I'm gonna kind of end with the last reflection from Andy as well before we wrap it up. But I think Andy wrote kind of EA in my view must start with business, then capabilities and services, then processes, then apps, then and only then IT. I have stopped talking with execs about EA as an architecture word turns the business off. So I call it business to IT linkage. Just another thought on how you can kind of communicate the value of enterprise architecture without using the academic phrases as many would refer it to. Of course, we have one last question. I'm just going to bring this as well.
I'm going to disagree with Andy just for just to have a bit of a difference. Actually, I don't disagree, but I'm going to put a different perspective on it.
Yeah.
So I certainly agree with the sentiment that he says. Fair enough. You don't want to be talking about enterprise architecture, and linkage is good. But I'll say something else, right? All architecture is design. Right? To quote Grady Booch, all architecture is design, not all design is architecture. And design is about continuously combining what you want to do with what is possible to do. And one of the mistakes I've seen in organizations, I'm not suggesting that Andy is suggesting this, right? Yeah. But one of the mistakes I've seen is that people have this very top-down view. or first we'll do the capabilities, and then we'll do the processes, and then we'll do the applications that implement the processes. They have this extreme top-down view. But it doesn't work like that in practice. It's a continuous cycle. Business has what they want to achieve. IT and others, the other aspects of capabilities like tools and people and processes, are the ability to do things. And what you want to do reinforces how you find new things to do with your ability to do things. And your ability to do things provides feedback to what people want to do. So I'm sure he's not suggesting a top-down approach, but I just want to point out that it's a continuous feedback loop between people, the people who want to achieve something, and all the different aspects, not just IT, which are the ability to make it happen group.
Yep. You should definitely have a couple of beers with Andy as well, so there might be several beers for you, Jason, after this session today, for some discussion and reflection.
It's nice weather here, so it's a good time for it.
It's really nice. I know you coming from Australia as well. You're used to the warm weather all year, but in Norway we need to make the most out of it with the few months that we have before we go into winter depression. But that's another story, as we like to say. So Jason, appreciate you sitting down with me today. I know kind of the final word, of course, is the research that we've been doing has been published as a first kind of white paper. It's out on the blog now. Our colleague Sarah will also refer to this after our session now. And yes, Richard Collard, the session will be available to review later. You will find the link in the LinkedIn kind of event in itself, but then also through our LinkedIn profile on Ardoq. So for everyone that has been engaging with us today, thank you so much. Appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us. And also the questions that we did not have time to answer, we'll make sure we follow up with that afterwards. And of course, if there's any further questions, feel free to reach out to Ardoq on LinkedIn or wherever suits you best. And we will try to give you our perspective on enterprise architecture. And then final question, Jason, has it been fun today?
It's been good fun. Thanks for the invite.
Great to have you here. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Enjoy the sun or whatever you are. And I look forward to seeing Jason having a couple of beers over the next couple of weeks.
All right.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.